for the House Oversight Committee.
How to make government effective again. Today's hearing on the performance of Howard Krongard, the State Department's Inspector General, bridges both of these fundamental issues. Just as Congress tries to do its job of oversight, we set up inspectors general for many of the departments and agencies to do the job of trying to stop abuse and waste and fraud of taxpayers' dollars and to make sure that the government is working more effectively. When we look at the State Department actions in Iraq, we look at the reason for this whole hearing. As we examine the construction of the new Baghdad embassy, the oversight of Blackwater, and corruption in the Iraqi government, 7 current and former officials in the Inspector General's office expressed concerns about Mr. Krongard's own oversight of the State Department. These officials and others who spoke with the committee during our investigation raised fundamental questions about Mr. Krongard's judgment, actions, and effectiveness. They described their serious concern about his inadequate oversight of the construction of the Baghdad embassy, his failure to assist the Justice Department's investigation of Blackwater for arms smuggling, his refusal to pursue charges of procurement fraud implicating DynCorp, his intervention in the investigation of Kenneth Tomlinson, and his lack of independence in auditing the State Department's financial statements. The committee was told that due to Mr. Krongard's abusive management style, the Office of the Inspector General is bleeding people right and left. What these officials told the committee is summarized in a staff report I'm releasing today, and without objection it will be made part of the official record. One of Mr. Krongard's key responsibilities is providing oversight for the State Department's construction of the new Baghdad embassy. In a previous hearing, we learned that the project will cost $144 million more than projected, is far behind schedule, and has potentially life-threatening construction deficiencies. There are also allegations that the building's contractor, First Kuwaiti, was involved in labor trafficking. When Mr. Krongard heard that his staff might investigate this issue, he sent them an email that said, as one official described it, quote, "Cease and desist all work. I'm taking care of this," end quote. Mr. Krongard conducted his own personal and unprecedented investigation of this potential scandal. According to Mr. Krongard, he interviewed 6 employees who had been handpicked by First Kuwaiti. He questioned them without a translator present and took virtually no notes. Mr. Krongard then concluded that there was no evidence that First Kuwaiti had committed human rights violations. The reaction of Mr. Krongard's senior staff to this investigation is remarkable. Mr. Krongard's deputy said the effort was, quote, unorthodox, didn't comply with any standards, and was the furthest thing from an investigation. Another official warned that Mr. Krongard's investigation ran the risk of inadvertently ruining a future prosecution. The former head of Mr. Krongard's audit division told us that the report would never pass muster in my organization and in any IG investigation that I've ever worked in, end quote. She also said, quote, "It's an embarrassment to the community," end quote. A special agent was even more blunt, calling Mr. Krongard's report, quote, "an affront to our profession," end quote. Given the strong condemnations from the professional staff in the Inspector General's office, this incident alone would justify today's hearing. Unfortunately, it is not an isolated incident. In fact, I don't believe it is even the most serious allegation raised against Mr. Krongard. In the course of our investigation, Mr. Krongard's investigators told us he placed First Kuwaiti off limits to investigation. They said he refused to pursue credible complaints about fraud, waste, and abuse in the embassy project, and rejected proposals to audit the construction process during construction so that problems could be addressed as they happen. When Justice Department wanted to investigate these matters, it asked Mr. Krongard for cooperation. He refused repeatedly. In one instance, Mr. Krongard emailed his staff, stand down on this and do not assist, end quote. In one mind-boggling sequence, Mr. Krongard, against the advice of his most senior staff, insisted on meeting, quote, a person of interest, end quote, in an investigation involving the embassy without assistance of counsel or investigators. 3 days after meeting with Mr. Krongard, the potential suspect canceled the scheduled meeting with audit officials and left the United States. Shortly after that, Mr. Krongard insisted on meeting with another potential suspect during a trip to Iraq. This time, his senior staff not only advised him to cancel the meeting, but asked the Justice Department to instruct Mr. Krongard not to conduct haphazard witness interviews. Despite the additional warning from the Justice Department, Mr. Krongard met with the individual. When he returned to Washington, he wanted to debrief his investigators on his meeting. The agents were worried that the information might taint them and ruin any credible investigation. They specifically asked Mr. Krongard not to share his impressions with them, but he ignored their request and sent one of the agents an email summarizing his conversation with the potential suspect. Well, none of these actions make any sense. When the Justice Department asked for cooperation, Mr. Krongard refused. When they warned him that his freelance investigations would jeopardize potential prosecutions, he ignored that. When his own staff tried to advise him on proper investigative procedures, he ignored them. If the reports the committee has received from the Justice Department and the Inspector General's senior staff are accurate, Mr. Krongard has acted with reckless incompetence. And the question about Mr. Krongard's performance aren't limited to the embassy in Baghdad. The Justice Department sought Mr. Krongard's cooperation as it investigated reports that a large private security contractor was smuggling weapons into Iraq. Instead of cooperating, Mr. Krongard apparently created a series of obstacles to the inquiry. One of Mr. Krongard's aides told our committee that, quote, there was absolutely no justifiable investigative, management, or any kind of reason for us to stop that investigation. The Justice Department shares that view and told the committee, at this juncture, we cannot determine all of the ramifications of the IG's conduct, but some of his actions have certainly impacted the investigation. For reasons that remain unclear, the line IG agents have been forced to funnel requests within their own agency through a congressional and public relations official. This is not the usual practice. The Inspector General also issued a statement without advance coordination with department attorneys confirming the existence of this investigation, which is inconsistent with our law enforcement interests. That was from what the Justice Department told our committee. Well, the Justice Department has advised us that Mr. Krongard's action resulted in a cumbersome and time-consuming investigative process and added multiple layers to our investigative efforts. As of this last Friday, the Justice Department still has not received the State Department materials it has requested. As Mr. Krongard revealed through some ill-advised comments, the company implicated in the weapons smuggling is Blackwater. We have now learned that Mr. Krongard's brother, Buzzy Krongard, serves on Blackwater's advisory board. We have also learned that Mr. Krongard concealed this apparent conflict of interest from his own deputy, even as he remained actively involved in monitoring the Justice Department's criminal investigation. In the course of today's hearing, we will also examine allegations about Mr. Krongard's actions regarding investigations into DynCorp and its subcontractors, his decision to allow the State Department to replace unfavorable financial audits with favorable ones, his contact with Kenneth Tomlinson to alert him to a possible investigation of wrongdoing, and his management approach to the Inspector General's office. It is a staggering list of allegations from Mr. Krongard's own staff. In committee interviews,